It's strange being here like this.
I imagine it would be. Are you surprised to know you're one of the most famous people to ever live? That your face is on the $1 bill, the most widely used form of currency in the world?
That is a strange thing to hear. I figured my name might be remembered, at least for a time. A man who leads an army in rebellion and helps shape a new government. It comes with a certain amount of notice. But to be that well known, on money, of all things, I wouldn't have imagined it. I spent a fair bit of my life trying to avoid too much praise. I turned down the talk of kingship. I stepped away when my time was done. I always believed a republic should rest on laws, not the fame of men.
As famous as you are, I don't think you're well known to people.
I wasn't one to write about my feelings, and I guarded my privacy like a fortress. That may have helped my reputation, but it didn't do much for letting people in. I suppose, over time, the quieter parts of me got lost.
In your time, did you feel unknown or misunderstood or something else?
Misunderstood? No, I don't think so. Not in the way some men feel it, with fire in the belly about being wronged. I think I was more guarded. There were parts of me I didn't show even to those close. I held tight to discipline, to silence, to control. It was how I was raised, and how I kept order in a world full of uncertainty. But it meant people saw the shape of me more than the man himself. They saw the commander, the president, the gentleman farmer, not the restless soul underneath.
I see.
I don't know that I ever longed to be known, but I did feel the weight of being watched, judged, expected to stand firm even when I felt like falling over. That can make a man feel alone, even in the room full of admirers.
George, before I bring you up to date on world events after your death, I'd like to hear a bit more about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia, on Pope's Creek in 1732. Tidewater country, low fields, warm summers, the Potomac not far off.
Tell me about your mother.
Mary Ball Washington. She was proud, devout, and sharp-tongued. Never one to flatter or fuss. She believed in hard work, obedience, and the Lord's providence. I can't say she gave out much affection, not the soft kind. But she gave what she thought mattered, discipline. After my father died, she raised 5 children on her own, no small task. She managed the farm, oversaw the household, made do with what we had. She didn't remarry, which was uncommon, and took resolve. We had our differences. In my youth, I often chafed under her will. She could be controlling and quick to criticize, even after I became general, even president. There were times I found it vexing, even embarrassing. But with age, I came to understand her better. She was doing what she knew, holding the family together alone in a hard world. And perhaps part of my steel came from being forged against her will.
Did you feel loved by her as a child?
My mother believed in showing love through labor and expectation. If I was clothed, fed, and instructed in the ways of God and duty, then she had done her part. Did I feel loved? As a boy, not always. I often felt judged, measured, like I had to earn her approval and rarely did. But I think now, with time behind me, I see it differently. Her kind of love was survival.
I'm sorry you lost your father at such a young age.
Thank you.
What do you remember about him?
I remember that he was steady, not stern like my mother, more even-tempered, more fair. He had presence. He owned land, milled flour, raised tobacco. He was a planter of some standing, and I looked up to him. He died when I was 11, so my memories are like fading sketches. I recall the sound of his voice more than the words. Calm but firm, He taught me to work with my hands, to respect the land. His death was sudden. He took ill and was gone not long after. With him gone, there was no one to carry me further in schooling, no direct path into wealth or status. My older brothers had more claim to inheritance, and I had to find my own way. I often wondered what life might have been had he lived a while longer. Maybe I wouldn't have become the man I did. I'll never know.
Sounds like you admired and loved him.
I did. Very much. He was the sort of man I wanted to become. Respected, capable, calm in his dealings. I don't remember him ever raising his voice. He carried himself with dignity, but not pride, and I felt safe in his presence, which is a feeling that leaves a mark on a boy. I think I spent a good part of my life trying to live in a way that would have made him proud.
Did your parents influence you as a leader, your leadership style?
Yes, I see it clearly. Steadiness from my father, discipline from my mother.
Tell me about your relationships with your siblings. Did you get along?
It varied. There were many of us, some full siblings, some half. My father had children from his first marriage, and then 5 more with my mother. I was the eldest of her children, but not of the whole brood. Lawrence, my eldest half-brother, was the one I looked up to most. He was everything I wanted to be. Educated, polished, held in high regard. He served with distinction under Admiral Vernon in the Caribbean, and named his estate Mount Vernon after him. I idolized him, truly. When he fell ill with tuberculosis, I traveled with him to Barbados. That was the only time I ever left the colonies. When he died not long after, it hit me hard. I inherited Mount Vernon through him.
And your younger siblings?
Yes, Samuel, John, Charles, and Betty. We had the usual mix, some closeness, some distance. I felt a sense of duty toward them, especially after our father died. I think they looked to me as a kind of stand-in. But I also had ambitions that took me away from family matters. There was always respect, obligation, and, in some cases, quiet affection beneath it.
I see. Tell me about your education.
My formal schooling was modest and ended early when my father passed. That cut short any hopes of studying abroad or attending a university, as my older half-brothers had done. What I did receive was a basic education, reading, writing, arithmetic, and some surveying and geography. I was taught by local tutors and, for a time, attended a school run by a Mr. Williams near Fredericksburg. But it was practical learning, not the classical sort with Latin and Greek. I never had the polish of Jefferson or Adams in that regard.
Was that ever a source of insecurity for you?
Well, I endeavored to make up for it with self-discipline. I read widely, books on agriculture, politics, military science, history. I studied the lives of Roman statesmen, British generals, and the codes of honor that define gentlemen of standing. I suppose I always felt a touch self-conscious about my lack of formal education. It made me quiet in debates and more inclined to listen than to speak. But it also made me deliberate. I prepared. I observed. And when I spoke, I made sure it counted.
What did you do for fun as a child?
I loved to ride horses. Fast, strong ones. I hunted, fished, and roamed the woods around Ferry Farm. There's a kind of freedom in the wilderness that I found comforting.
Mm-hmm.
I also took to surveying early on. That might sound like work to some, but I found real enjoyment in it. Measuring land, plotting boundaries, it gave me a sense of order and purpose, and let me wander far from home. I played games common to boys of the time, wrestling, running races, and pitching quoits.
I've never heard of that. What is that?
A game of tossing rings. You take a ring, traditionally made of iron or rope, and try to toss it over a spike or peg that's been driven into the ground some distance away.
I see. Yeah, we have games like that.
Simple pleasure, really. But those little contests, I enjoyed. Games of skill, not brute strength, suited me well.
What were your dreams as a child?
I knew I wanted to rise, to be respected, to hold land and be counted among Virginia's finest. But I didn't yet have the language for it. As I grew older, surveying became a step towards something more. I imagined acquiring land out west, vast stretches of it, building a proper estate, marrying well, and after Lawrence's service with the British, I dreamt of a military commission. I wanted a red coat of my own. That was one of my first specific ambitions, to serve as an officer in His Majesty's army.
Wow. Ironic, given how things turned out.
Aye, and you wouldn't be the first to say so. But when I was a young man, loyalty to the Crown was the natural order. We were British subjects, and many of us took pride in it. I saw service in the King's army as the surest path to advancement. A red coat meant rank, respect, the mark of a gentleman soldier. At one point, I would have worn that red proudly, had they let me.
What do you mean, had they let you? Did you ever enlist in the King's Army?
I served under the Crown, yes, but not as a commissioned officer in the regular British Army. That's what I meant by had they let me. I held command in the Virginia militia during the French and Indian War, and I was given the rank of colonel within the colony. But I was never granted a royal commission in the King's Army itself. I applied for it more than once.
Tell me about your command in the Virginia militia. Who were you fighting for and who were you fighting against?
I was fighting for the British Empire, specifically for the colony of Virginia, which raised its own troops. I served as a colonial officer, not in the King's regular army, but in a local force defending British claims in the Americas. We were fighting against the French, who were building forts and trying to claim the same land in the Ohio Valley. But we were also fighting Native American tribes, many of whom had allied with the French, seeing them as less of a threat than the British.
It's fascinating how the British and the French oscillate between America's ally and enemy over the course of your life. Is there a lesson there?
Indeed there is, and always in my thoughts. The lesson is this: nations have no permanent friends, only permanent interests.
Interesting. Who are the people in your early life who truly saw greatness in you or made you feel special?
That's a thoughtful question. Lawrence, my half-brother, was the first. He believed in me.
The half-brother you inherited Mount Vernon from.
Yes, took me under his wing, brought me into higher circles, introduced me to the Fairfaxes, which opened doors I never could have reached alone. He treated me like more than just a younger brother. He treated me like a young man of potential. Lord Fairfax was another. He saw something in me, even though I was young and rough around the edges. He entrusted me with surveying his vast lands in the Shenandoah Valley. I was just 17, and yet there I was, mapping the wilderness on behalf of one of the most powerful men in Virginia. That trust shaped me. I'd like to say my mother, but the truth is, she rarely voiced anything like admiration. Perhaps she believed in me in her way, but she showed it through expectations, not praise. There were others here and there, but it was Lawrence and Lord Fairfax who lit the first real fires. They didn't just see ability, they gave me responsibility. And that was how I grew.
History remembers you as a planter, general, president, politician, founding father, revolutionary leader. Which label suits you best? If there's one that I haven't mentioned, that's fine too.
Farmer. That's who I was before the world called to me, and who I returned to when it let me go.
I think for some that answer might sound too modest to be true.
I see how it might sound that way, but I don't say it to court modesty. I say it because it's the plain truth.
What was your relationship to politics? Did you enjoy that arena? Was it just a necessary means to a greater end? Do you even see yourself as a politician?
Politics, to my mind, was a burden, not a pleasure. I never considered myself a politician in the manner of Mr. Adams or Mr. Jefferson. They were men of theory and debate, always in the thick of argument. I had no taste for that kind of wrangling. I preferred action to talk, results to rhetoric. That said, I understood the necessity of it. A republic cannot govern itself without men willing to step into the fray. So I did my part, first in Virginia's House of Burgesses, then later at the Constitutional Convention, and of course as president. But I never enjoyed it.
What is the House of Burgesses?
It was the elected legislative body of the colony of Virginia, the first of its kind in British America. It trained many of the men who would go on to become revolutionaries. It was our first classroom in liberty.
Was this your first introduction to politics?
Yes, I was still a young man, fresh from the French and Indian War, and the seat was in Frederick County, out west near the frontier lands I defended. I was more soldier than statesman at that point. I won the election in part because I was known, respected, I believe, for my service. But I had little training in the business of laws and motions. My first time attending, I was so nervous, I didn't utter a word. Still, I paid attention. I watched how men moved in that room, who commanded respect, who used words like weapons, who sought truth, and who sought favor. I learned, quietly, and over time, I found my voice.
What political issues were most important to you?
In the early years, it was the matter of British overreach. The taxes without representation. The constant slighting of colonial dignity. I believed in loyalty to the crown for a time, but I could not abide being treated as a second-class subject. When Parliament acted without consent, when soldiers were quartered in our homes, that awakened something in me. Of course, there were other issues of concern throughout my lifetime.
Let's touch on a few. I'm fascinated to hear. Where should we start?
Foreign entanglements troubled me.
Go on.
I believed firmly that the young republic should steer clear of permanent alliances. We were too new, too fragile, to be caught in Europe's endless rivalries.
No permanent friends, only permanent interests.
Aye, very good.
Anything else?
After the war, I pushed for a national economy. I supported measures to strengthen credit, establish a national bank, and lay the groundwork for industry and infrastructure. I knew the war had left us poor and disjointed. Hamilton and I didn't agree on everything, but I valued his vision for a strong fiscal foundation.
Were you afraid of the federal taxes you were implementing basically taking the place of the British taxes you were fighting to be free from?
Yes, and no. The heart of the matter with Britain was that Parliament imposed duties upon us, yet we had no voice in their making. It wasn't the taxes alone that sparked the fire. It was the principle that free men should not be governed at a distance without consent. But once we were a nation unto ourselves, the question changed. A republic must provide for its own defense, honor its debts, build roads, maintain order. That requires revenue.
Yes, I understand, but for some, it must have been like, we just want our independence to get away from these taxes. We won, and now more taxes. It must have been controversial.
Indeed it was, bitterly so. Many feared that a strong federal government, especially one with the power to tax, would become just as oppressive as the crown. They'd fought and bled for liberty, and now here was a central authority with the power to reach into their pockets. Suspicion ran high.
And still does today. What other issues come to mind?
Military readiness was close to me. I believed in having a trained force, not to dominate, but to defend. While I feared standing armies in peacetime, as any good Republican would, I also knew what came of being unprepared. The West, the frontier, was another constant concern. How to settle it justly, how to avoid war with the native nations, how to honor promises made while also expanding our reach. I won't say we always did right by the tribes, but I did believe in law over chaos, and I worked to maintain peace where I could. And then there was the contradiction of slavery.
Yes, I'd like to discuss that with you. I think I understand, but would like to hear why you use the word contradiction.
We declared that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And yet, many of us held other men in bondage. How could that be reconciled? It could not.
Yet, you were a slave owner yourself.
Slavery was woven into the fabric of daily life. It was lawful. It was common. It was, to many, simply the way of things. And I accepted it for far too long. I benefited from it. I managed it. I enforced it. But over time, I came to see it not just as an economic system, but as a moral failing. I saw the humanity of those I held in bondage.
When and how did you come into the ownership of enslaved people?
I was just 11 years of age when my father died. Among the property he left to me were 10 Negro servants. They were not presented as people, but as assets, part of the estate, listed alongside land, livestock, and tools. That was the custom, and I did not question it. I accepted it as a boy raised in Virginia, where nearly every plantation was worked by slaves. As I grew, I acquired more, through inheritance, through purchase, through marriage to Martha, who brought a considerable number with her from the Custis estate. By the time of the Revolution, there were over 100 hands at Mount Vernon. I learned to manage them, to work them, to punish them. That is the truth of it. And for many years, I did not see it as anything but necessary.
I've read that you were brutal to enslaved people who attempted to escape.
That charge is not without basis. Those who attempted to escape were often pursued, sometimes forcibly returned. Not always by me directly, but under my order or my knowledge. It was seen, legally speaking, as property fleeing the estate. But in truth, it was a person fleeing bondage. I did post notices. I did offer rewards. I did try to recover those who ran. I viewed escape as a threat to the order of the plantation, to my authority. That was my mindset. I believed myself a benevolent master. There is another contradiction. Was I brutal in comparison to others? Perhaps not by the measures of the day, but that does not cleanse it. The system itself was brutal, and I upheld it, feared its unraveling. That's the truth of it.
Did you ever take any firm actions to improve the lives of enslaved people, either those you owned or others?
Yes, though I must confess they were limited in scope, and far too late. At Mount Vernon, I made efforts to improve the conditions of my servants. I allowed family units to stay together, provided medical care and some education. These were not revolutionary actions, but they were more than some of my peers offered. I gradually came to believe that slavery was incompatible with the ideals of the Republic. Quietly, I stopped selling Negroes away from Mount Vernon for fear of separating families. I also supported legislation that would halt the spread of slavery into new territories. Perhaps, most notably, in my last will and testament, I freed every slave I owned outright. Over 120 souls. I required they be clothed, fed, and supported if they were too old or infirm to work. I also made clear that no one was to be sold. However, I could not free those who came through Martha's estate, as they were part of the Custis holdings and not legally mine. That haunted me.
It's a horrible part of American history and world history. Growing up in America, we learn about you from a very young age. But this part of your story is usually left out. As someone who grew up with great reverence for you, it was a painful part of your story to learn. Do you feel like you did enough?
No. I did not fight for abolition. I did not speak out when my voice might have carried weight. That is responsibility, and therefore I am not innocent. But I did try, in my final years, to bend the arc of my life towards something more just. I only wish I had begun sooner.
In the years after your death, hundreds of statues of you have been built. In the last 20 years or so, a small percentage of people have questioned whether your statue should remain because of your history as a slave owner. Curious what you think about that.
I think they are right to ask the question. Statues are not history. They are honor. They are built not to tell the full truth, but to hold up a particular truth that people wish to celebrate. And if a people no longer see in me something they wish to hold high, then they have every right to say so. I was a slaveholder. That is not a footnote. It is a wound in the founding of the nation. If someone cannot look upon a statue of me without seeing that wound first, I do not fault them. I would only ask that they see the whole of me, my contradictions, my contributions, my efforts, and my regrets, late though they were.
What I have to say to you now, gang, won't take much more than a minute, but it's serious and important, so please don't go away. As you've no doubt noticed, we haven't anything to sell in this program right now. That is, no commercial product, I mean. Well, that gives us an opportunity to sell you something that's bigger than anything you can buy. Peace. That's something you can't buy with money, but which you can assure by simply learning how to understand and live with your neighbor. You see, when people try to understand each other, they find it's really easy. Honest it is. All you have to do is accept the fact that although all men are in truth created equal, there are certain differences. There must be. Such as, for instance, we can't all look alike exactly. We can't be expected to think alike exactly. But those things don't make us really different because underneath all that, we're all people, human beings. And with that as a basic truth, can you see any need for quarreling and name-calling and other such things that make for unhappiness? Of course not. So from now on, in your daily contact with other boys and girls and grown-ups, try to keep that in mind, because that's the only way to ensure peace.
Truth Serum is a podcast with sponsorship opportunities you'll scarcely find anywhere else. Wish to spread your message far and wide? Simply point your browser to truthserumproject.com/sponsor. Truth Serum is a place where the most influential minds in history can react to the latest and greatest products and services. Just visit truthserumproject.com/sponsor. And for brands with a proud history and heritage of their own, we bring back timeless ads from yesteryear. Or if all parties are aligned, you may receive an endorsement from the host of the show himself. Again, that's truthserumproject.com/sponsor. Get on the right side of history with your advertisement on Truth Serum.
Did you ever doubt the revolution would succeed?
Many times. There were days, long, cold, bitter days, when doubt pressed on me like the weight of the world. When Congress had no money and no teeth. When enlistments ran out and spirits broke. I remember walking among the tents and hearing the silence, not of sleep, but of resignation. That's a kind of silence you don't forget.
What was the lowest point where things were bleak and you thought the war might be lost.
I'd say the winter of 1777 into 78 at Valley Forge. We were battered from defeat, cold to the bone and starving. Supplies were scarce, roads impassable, and what little reached us was often spoiled or stolen by unscrupulous contractors. Men wrapped their feet in rags and left blood in the snow. Diseases ran through the camp. Desertion rose. Officers resigned in frustration. The people back home in their warm houses began to question whether the fight was worth the cost. There were whispers in Congress of replacing me. Some favored General Gates after Saratoga. There were letters passed in secret. I knew of them. I held my tongue.
What turned things around?
A few things. None swift, none easy. First, the men who did push on. They endured not because they were paid well or fed well, but because they believed in something bigger than themselves. I cannot overstate the courage of those soldiers. Freezing and starving, and still they held the line. That kind of grit cannot be ordered. It must be shared. Second, Baron von Steuben. He knew how to train an army. He broke us down and built us back up. He gave us discipline and pride. After him, we moved not like a rebel, but like soldiers. That changed everything. And third, France. The alliance with King Louis gave us what we could not supply ourselves. Naval power, arms, funds, and a new legitimacy in the eyes of the world. It told Britain this was not some squabble in a distant colony. It was now a war between nations. And lastly, time. The longer we held on, the more the British bled money, men, and morale. They expected a swift campaign, not a drawn-out struggle. We knew the land. We could vanish and return. That wore them down. There was no single turning point, just a series of hard-won moments. It was not brilliance that won the war. It was belief.
Wow. I read that you lost more battles than you won.
That's true.
If you had to say 3 things that made you a great general.
Well, first I'd say I was effective, not great. Let me think. Patience. The British had more guns, more men, more ships. In an open-pitched battle, I would have lost our army within a year. Patience was critical. Then I would say focusing on survival. Some called it cowardice. I called it calculation. A living army could fight another day. A defeated one could not.
Makes sense. And how about a third?
I listened. I didn't pretend to know everything. I sought counsel, took advice, and trusted the judgment of others when it was sound. A general who thinks himself the only mind in the room is a dangerous fool.
Yeah, I don't know could be my favorite words in the English language. So many problems arise when people are too proud to admit they don't know. And it's especially rare for people in power to have the confidence to acknowledge what they don't know.
There's truth in that. I don't know. It's not a weakness. It's honesty. And a man in command, if he's wise, learns early that pretending to know what he doesn't can cost lives. Pride has led more armies and nations into ruin than ignorance ever did.
Various people throughout history have said you were more symbol than substance. How do you respond?
I've heard such things, even in my own time. I won't quarrel with it, not entirely. I was never the most eloquent man in the room. I wasn't a scholar. I did not dazzle with words or radical ideas. But I knew who I was. I knew what the moment required.
And let's not underestimate the power of a symbol.
Yes. I understood the importance of symbolism. To appear calm amidst chaos, to project confidence in the face of adversity. It matters.
Maybe the symbol was the substance.
Very clever.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about that is rare for people in positions of power was walking away from power, something that you did.
Yes, twice.
Tell me about the first time. What were you walking away from, and why did you do it?
I had led the Continental Army through 8 long years of war. We had won. The Treaty of Paris had been signed. The British were gone. The war was over. And I was Commander-in-Chief of all American forces, with the Army still loyal to me. In many places more loyal to me than to Congress. That's a dangerous thing. Many generals would be tempted to reach for a crown. Some even hoped I would. But I knew better. That would poison everything we had just fought for. We had not thrown off a king just to raise up another. So I went to Annapolis, where Congress was meeting, and I handed back my commission. I gave it up, not because I was tired, but because I believed the very act of walking away would set the tone for this new nation.
What was the tone you were setting?
I wanted the people to see that in America, the military answers to the civilian, and not the other way around. That liberty depends not just on victory, but on restraint. So I returned to Mount Vernon, to my plough and my fields. Not to be forgotten, but to be ordinary. And I believe that act spoke louder than any battle I ever fought.
This idea of the military and government answering to the people, it's so ingrained into the spirit of America. I wonder if America would be a completely different place had you not stepped away.
I was no prophet. I simply knew what power does to men. And I knew that the greatest thing I could give this country at that moment was to let go.
And then the second time you stepped away from power, you famously stepped down from the presidency after 2 4-year terms. Tell me about that.
There was no law to stop me, only my own sense of what was right. Many wanted me to continue. Some feared the Republic would falter without me. But that was precisely why I needed to step aside. If the government could not endure without one man at its head, then it was no government at all. It was a monarchy in waiting.
Was it a difficult decision?
The most difficult of my life. Not because I desired the power, but because I felt the weight of the responsibility. I feared what might happen if the next man was reckless or unsteady. I feared the rise of parties, the strain between North and South, the influence of foreign nations. Part of me felt I should stay, to steady the helm a bit longer. But I also knew that staying too long, even with good intent, could do harm. So I wrestled with it, quietly, for more than a year. I spoke with Hamilton, with Jefferson, with trusted friends. I weighed the good I might still do against the damage my example might cause if I overstayed. In the end, I chose to trust the nation, to believe that the Republic could carry on.
You've mentioned Adams, Jefferson, and Hamilton. What did you really think of these men? Let's start with Adams. Strengths and weaknesses in your view. I'm very curious.
What I liked about Adams was his integrity. He would not bend to please others. He said what he believed, even when it cost him. There was courage in that. He also had a fine grasp of government. His mind was keen, and his love for the Republic unquestionable. What I did not like was his temperament. He could be vain, suspicious and prone to quarrel over small matters. He took offense easily and gave it just as quick. There was little moderation in him, and that made him difficult in close company.
He seems like a what you see is what you get kind of person, uncompromising. I can see how that would make him a valuable friend and colleague.
Precisely. He was uncompromising, and I trusted his heart, even when I questioned his manner.
Thomas Jefferson.
An extraordinary mind. Curious, eloquent. He thought in broad strokes, saw the future with painter's eyes. He could write with great beauty, and he understood the spirit of the Revolution in a way few others did. But he had a tendency toward intrigue. He was too comfortable working behind the scenes, stirring opposition quietly while presenting a calm, genial face. During my presidency, I often felt he was undermining the unity I sought to preserve, fueling division rather than resolving it.
So different than Adams. Is it fair to say you saw him as conniving, two-faced, or dishonest?
Not entirely unfair. Jefferson had a gift for saying one thing in public and encouraging another in private. He could smile and speak of unity, while quietly supporting voices that worked against it. That troubled me. Not because he disagreed. Reasonable men will differ. But because he did so without candor. Where Adams was blunt to a fault, Jefferson was soft-spoken and shrewd. He rarely knew the full weight of what he was thinking. And, yes, at times it felt two-faced. But I would not call him dishonest in the ordinary sense. He believed what he said. His principles were real. He simply preferred to influence events from the shadows rather than the floor.
Alexander Hamilton.
Hamilton was brilliance set on fire. He had the sharpest mind I ever knew. Quick, bold, relentless. He understood finance, war, law, and power better than most scholars twice his age. He saw what the nation could be, not just what it was, and he pursued that vision with everything he had. What I liked about him, his energy, his clarity, his loyalty. When he gave his trust, he gave it fully, and he gave it to me. He served with distinction both in the field and in the cabinet. I relied on him more than any other advisor during my presidency. But his temperament, he was impetuous, vain, and quick to take offense, similar to Adams in that way. He made enemies needlessly, could not let a slight pass unanswered. He quarreled when silence would have served him better.
And he believed in a stronger central government, where Jefferson believed in more power residing with the states. Do I have that right?
Precisely.
Where did you fall in that continuum?
I stood between them. I believe the Articles of Confederation had shown us what happens when the federal government is too weak. No money, no army, no cohesion. That was chaos. I supported the Constitution because it gave the government the strength to function, but with checks to prevent abuse. So I leaned toward Hamilton's side when it came to order and national interest, especially during my presidency. But I shared Jefferson's wariness of concentrated power in the hands of too few. I valued balance. Always balance. In truth, I needed both of them. Their tension held the Republic upright, at least for a time.
Tell me about your wife, Martha. What was she like?
She was steady, kind, practical, not fond of ceremony, but she bore it with grace. When the war came, she joined me nearly every winter at Valley Forge, Morristown, wherever the army camped. She mended uniforms, comforted the wounded. She hated being away from home, but she came all the same. I can tell you this. I loved her. The quiet, endearing love that grows from shared burdens and earned trust. We lost both her children. Patsy died young and Jackie died during the war. Those losses weighed heavily on her. On us both. She never sought the spotlight. She would have preferred Mount Vernon to any Hall of State. But she supported me, stood by me, and never once asked for more than I could give. She was, in truth, my better half.
Mm. Sounds like you were very lucky to have her.
I was. More than I deserved, I sometimes thought.
You said we lost both her children. Were they also not your children?
She had 2 from her first marriage. I raised them as my own. I loved them, but they were hers by blood. Patsy died young from seizures. It was a sorrow that stayed with Martha all her life. Jackie lived longer, married, had children, but died of illness while serving as my aide in the war.
Mm.
After Jackie's death, we took in 2 of his children and raised them at Mount Vernon.
So you never had children of your own?
Regretfully, no.
Did you want to have children with Martha?
Yes, I did. I imagined sons, riding beside me through the fields, learning the measure of land and labor, bearing the Washington name into future generations. It was the natural course of things, or so I believed. A man marries, raises a family, passes down what he has built. When that did not come to pass, it was a quiet ache. Not a grief I ever gave voice to, but one I carried nonetheless.
What was preventing you from having children?
I cannot say with certainty, but I believe it was a condition of my own body, likely brought on by the illness I endured in my youth. I survived smallpox at a young age, and tuberculosis later on.
I mean, do you think this may have affected your ability to have children?
I do.
That must have been difficult.
I came to believe that if I could not shape a son or adore a daughter, I might help shape and adore a nation. That became my calling.
Beautiful. George, of all of the people we have not discussed, specifically as it relates to your time as president, who would I be most remiss in not asking about?
I would say James Madison.
Tell me about him.
The Constitution bears his fingerprints more than any other man's, and I trusted his judgment in those days. He was not loud, not boastful. He preferred reasoning over rhetoric. I admired that. But what I came to dislike, or perhaps regret, was the turn he took later. As Jefferson's influence grew, Madison aligned more with him and began to oppose many of the policies I had supported, especially those shaped by Hamilton. I believe the shift was more political than personal, but it stung all the same.
Who would you consider to be your biggest rival?
You mean other than King George?
I suppose I should have caveated that one. I meant politically in the United States.
If I must choose one, I would say Jefferson, in the later years. Not out of hatred, mind you. We began as allies, and I always recognized his brilliance. But his political vision came to stand in direct opposition to my own.
And your biggest ally?
Aside from Martha, it was without question Alexander Hamilton.
And who, in your view, was the most consequential person, most critical to the cause of the American Revolution?
That's a tall order. But if pressed, and this truth serum at work, I will tell you this. The cause needed a figure to gather around, a symbol of unity, particularly when the states were divided and morale was low. Someone trusted by the army, by Congress, not for brilliance, but for steadiness. That role fell to me. I didn't seek it, but I bore it. And perhaps in that way I was useful.
It surprises me, you naming yourself there. And I don't think it's something people would expect to hear from you in any other situation other than the ones we might find ourselves in here.
I think you are correct.
Who would you have named aside from yourself?
That would be Dr. Franklin. Without his efforts in Paris, his tact, his patience, his sheer presence, I do not believe that France would have joined our cause. And without France, I do not believe we would have prevailed. So if the revolution was a fire, Franklin struck the match abroad, and I kept it from going out at home.
Tell me more about Benjamin Franklin and the French.
He turned France from observer to ally, secured money, arms, and eventually the French fleet, the very ships that would trap Cornwallis at Yorktown. No one else could have done that. Not Adams, not Lee, not even Jefferson. Franklin had a way of making foreign men believe in the idea of America, even when our army was ragged and our Congress divided. France was our lifeline, but Franklin kept it from becoming our master. That balance between gratitude and independence was delicate, and he walked it better than anyone else could have.
I'm curious if you feel like you were chosen by a higher power to serve the nation as you did.
I've asked myself that many times, and to quote your favorite words, I don't know.
Do you believe in God?
Yes, I do. I have always believed in a higher power. Call it Providence, the Almighty, the Supreme Being. I do not claim to know his mind, nor do I speak of him lightly. But I have seen too many narrow escapes, too much quiet order in the midst of chaos, to believe this world is governed by chance alone.
Were you vocal about your faith?
I was not one to shout it. I kept it private, as a man's faith ought to be. But I prayed, not for triumph, but for guidance.
Do you believe you had a destiny?
I believe I had a duty. Whether that amounts to destiny, I cannot say.
George, I'd like to spend some time on the state of things in present day. I live in America in the year 2025.
That is difficult to fathom. To hear this experiment has endured this long is humbling.
I'd like to begin with getting your honest guess on a few things. Then I'll tell you what actually happened. Does that sound okay?
Ask what you will. I'll venture my guesses, though I expect I may be far off.
Would you guess America has had any civil war since your death?
I pray not. But I fear, yes. You say you live in America, so I would venture to guess no more than one or two.
There was one civil war in the mid-1800s. The South attempted to secede from the Union. A president by the name of Abraham Lincoln refused. Who do you think prevailed?
If the South seceded and the president stood firm in defense of the Union, then I must hope and believe that the North prevailed, but surely at a great cost.
You're correct once again. Do you think slavery is still legal?
I believe the abolition of it must have come long ago.
It was officially abolished in 1865.
Then I give thanks.
Do you think there's been a female president since your death?
I would guess not. In my time, the very idea would have been unthinkable.
It hasn't happened yet, but two women in particular came very, very close recently. What do you think about a woman being president?
I would not have supported such a thing. Not because I thought women unworthy, but because I saw it outside the bounds of the order of the time. I saw strength in women. I saw their sacrifice, intelligence, and their judgment. Martha was my equal in steadiness, if not in title.
We use the term political party to describe factions or camps, organizations of like-minded politicians and citizens to identify with. In your time, I believe there were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. How many prominent political parties do you think there are today?
I would expect that over the span of 2 centuries, New parties have risen and fallen with the issues of the age. Some likely fractured, others merged. So my best guess would be 3 to 5 prominent political parties in your time?
While several political parties exist, the Democrats and Republicans, as we call them today, dominate the political landscape, holding the vast majority of elected positions.
Tell me, do these parties serve the people? Or do they serve themselves? That, to me, is the measure of whether the spirit of party has become a tool or a poison.
It's a matter of opinion, I suppose. I'd rather give you some time to read up on it yourself. I'll give you a moment if you'd like.
Very gracious of you. I shall reflect in silence and take in what I can. I'm ready when you are.
Would you register as a Democrat or Republican if you were alive today?
I have read of your politics, of Democrats and Republicans, of red and blue states. I find both parties carry values I recognize. But what troubles me most is not which party is right. It is how both treat each other as enemies rather than fellow citizens. How every issue becomes a battlefield and every disagreement a test of loyalty. That is what I warned against. If I were alive today, I do not believe I would register as either.
Some might say that's evading the question and stepping out of the only viable options we have to choose from.
That may be so, and I understand the frustration behind it. But I would answer not to please, but to be honest.
Would you consider abstaining from voting?
Never. I would vote without fail. I would listen carefully. I would study, and then I would walk to the ballot, not for party, not for glory, but for the individual I felt best served the country and constitution I helped bring into being.
Do you think the world has ever united under one governing body?
No, I do not believe so. Nations are bound by more than law. They are shaped by language, history, pride, geography, and blood. These things do not yield easily to uniform rule.
Correct again. All right, different one here. Do you think a human being has ever walked on the surface of the moon?
My guess would be no. I cannot fathom how such a feat could be done. But if man has mastered the heavens, as he once mastered the seas, then I would consider it the greatest voyage since Columbus, or greater still.
The first man on the moon was an American by the name of Neil Armstrong. Happened in 1969.
Then I am astonished. Truly.
George, I'd like to give you some more time to familiarize yourself with the American political landscape and to learn more about some of your fellow presidents over the past 20 years or so. Is that something you'd be interested in?
The curiosity of all this is beyond me. Yet I am curious.
All right, then I'll give you a moment.
Have you ever asked an American how he or she feels about the business of voting? If you have, it's probably given you a whole new slant on the matter. To those men and women who were born in other countries, the right to vote is a precious privilege, and they line up before the voting booth on Election Day with the same high sense of pride and responsibility that one might feel upon being awarded some rare degree. Actually, the right to vote should give us all the same heady thrill. It is we, you and I, who determine the course of our country and the conditions of our own lives with those votes we cast on Election Day. Just one reminder, make sure your opinions will be counted. Make sure you cast your vote by being very sure to register. Registration days differ in varying localities. Check on the time in your community and get your name on the rolls. Then take advantage of all of America's media of communication for informing yourself on the issues involved. And then when Election Day comes, go to the polls with pride and responsibility and vote.
Shall we continue?
So much information. I'm eager to discuss.
What are your impressions of modern-day democracy?
There is noise without pause, opinion without reflection, and a kind of performance in politics that troubles me. I see parties hardened into tribes. I see truth bent to suit convenience. And I wonder if liberty has grown so familiar that it is now taken for granted, treated as a birthright, not a responsibility. Still, for all its faults, I see persistence. The vote endures. Power still changes hands. Debate still lives. That tells me democracy, though battered, is still breathing.
What does the word liberty mean?
The right to govern one's own life.
As you saw, of our last 4 presidents, we've had 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. I'd like to get your take on each of them. We'll start with George W. Bush.
George W. Bush appears to have been a man of conviction, shaped by faith, family, and a deep sense of personal duty. He faced extraordinary trials, chief among them the attacks of September the 11th, which thrust the nation into grief and war. The structures that fell. I can't imagine standing before them in New York, seeing such a thing with my own eyes, let alone seeing them come down.
It was a horrible tragedy. It changed the country in more ways than one.
I can see that. And in his response, I see President Bush. I see a leader who sought to unite, who spoke with resolve, and who leaned upon the strength of the Republic. That instinct to rally the people, to remind them of who they are in the face of terror, that is no small thing. I respect it. But I also see decisions made in haste, wars entered with uncertain cause, and a failure to prepare for the weight of what followed. A president must not only lead in crisis, he must foresee its shadow. The war in the nation of Iraq, in particular, strikes me as a cautionary tale, a lesson in the danger of certainty untested by doubt.
Barack Obama.
His election alone marks a turning point in the story of the nation. That a man of African descent could rise to the highest office, peacefully, by the will of the people, that would have been unthinkable in my time. He inherited a nation in crisis, financial collapse, 2 wars, and sought to steer it with a steady hand. He clearly carried himself with composure, and a gift for oratory. However, lofty words, however stirring, must be anchored in consistent action. At times I sensed a tension between idealism and pragmatism, a noble heart constrained by political caution. No presidency is without error, but I believe he sought to lift the office and the people rather than divide them.
Donald Trump.
Strikes me as a departure from what the office has long represented, both in conduct and in tone. He came not from the world of public service, but from business and spectacle. I see that many admired his willingness to speak plainly and challenge institutions. Others saw in him a threat to those very institutions. He appealed to a sense of grievance among many Americans, those who felt unheard. That is no small matter. A republic must listen to its people, all its people. And yet, I fear his style often deepened division rather than bridged it. A president must elevate the office, not bend it to his will. The title demands restraint, dignity, and a belief that one serves all citizens, not just those who cheer. I see in his time moments of economic strength, but also sharp discord, erosion of norms, and a kind of politics fueled by conflict. The events surrounding the close of his first presidency, particularly the refusal to accept the peaceful transfer of power, strikes at the very heart of the Republic. I can think of no greater danger than for leaders to place self above the Constitution. I value character in high office as much as policy, and character to me is shown not in dominance, but in discipline, not in conquest, but in concession when the Republic calls for it.
Joe Biden.
To my eye, a figure of endurance. A man forged not by ambition alone, but by personal sorrow and long experience. He appears to be a servant of long standing, decades in the Senate, the vice presidency, and the highest office. His strength seems less in oratory than in empathy. I see a man who speaks not to stir crowds, but to calm them. There is value in that. He entered office at a time of great division, amid a pandemic, economic strain, and the wounds of political upheaval. His age and quiet bring into question whether he had the vigor the office demands. I understand that concern. The presidency requires stamina of mind and body. But I also know that wisdom often travels with age, and that calm leadership, especially after turmoil, is its own kind of strength.
If you were to run for the presidency today, what would your message be?
If I were to stand before the people today, after all that has passed, after all that I have learned, my message would be this. The Republic is not promised. It is preserved. Not by parties, not by pundits, not by power, but by you, the citizens, by your conscience, your character, your willingness to see your neighbor not as an enemy, but as a fellow steward of this great experiment. I would say, we have drifted too far from duty. I would not promise ease. I would not flatter. I would ask for sacrifice, for discipline, for a return to public virtue. I would not speak of the so-called political left or right, but of together. Not of grievance, but of grit. Not of dominance, but of dignity. And I would say this plainly. America is still young enough to be shaped, and old enough to be wise.
And do you think you could win?
Perhaps, but likely not. I do not get the sense that the modern electorate seeks to be challenged. But I would not run to win. I would run to serve. The more important question is this. Would I be worthy of the presidency? Would I be of the most service to the people? And that, I believe, is the standard America must return to.
George, I'm wondering if after familiarizing yourself with the current state of things, if you have any questions for me.
Oh, thank you for the courtesy and for the conversation thus far. I do have questions. So, if I may,
Of course.
do the people still believe in the Republic?
You know, the term republic isn't used often. People use the word democracy much more frequently to describe America. I don't know this for sure, but I don't think most people know what republic means.
Is that right?
But do they believe in the idea of representative government? By and large, yes. But I'm afraid to report that many believe in it only when it reflects their own beliefs. They often see disagreement as a failure of government.
That pains me to hear, but I understand it, and I'm grateful for your honesty. When people believe in the Republic only when it agrees with them, they forget what the Republic is for. It was never meant to give each man his way. It was meant to give each man his voice.
Yes.
His strong moral character still considered strength. It seems to be of lesser concern.
In the traditional sense, you know, like staying true to your word, showing grace, speaking with respect to your political opponents, it's less of a factor than it was even as recently as 20 years ago. I think people care much more about reaching their desired endpoint versus their means to getting there.
If the people value only victory, then they invite leaders who will say anything, promise anything, do anything to win. And such leaders do not stop once the prize is won.
You know, I actually collected a few clips for you. They come from recent political ads. These are recorded messages from people running for president, Congress, and the Senate. Would you like to take a listen?
Sure.
All right. Here, take a listen to this.
There's an inferno raging in Washington.
Swamp Captain Mitch McConnell has created millions of jobs for China people.
Some people see a dumpster fire and do nothing but watch the spectacle.
I will beat Joe Manchin and ditch Cocaine Mitch for the sake of the kids.
A tree fell on Greg Abbott. He sued and got millions. Since then, he spent his career working against other victims.
Taliban Dan Webster, hands off our bodies.
He is being supported by CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Shame on Bill Brady. I am a Republican, but I don't support him for the mass euthanization of animals.
I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm, so when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork. Washington's full of big spenders. Let's make them squeal.
But when this rifle is the only thing standing between your family and a dozen angry Democrats in Klan hoods, you just might need that semi-automatic and all 30 rounds.
The good people of Arizona have had enough of you. It's time for a showdown.
Bill Ray running for Congress.
I do remember the day that he suggested that we shoot people on the streets.
That's him phone banking for Donald Trump after Trump called his wife ugly. Look at him. What kind of a man does that? Oh, yeah, Trump also said his father was probably a murderer. You're looking at the saddest man in America. Pathetic.
This saddens me. The politics of my time were no less contentious, even brutal at times. But it was important to show good character. If character no longer holds weight, if showing restraint, admitting fault, treating opponents with dignity are seen as quaint or weak, then I fear you will not recognize the damage till long after it's done. A good leader governs not only by policy, but by example. He teaches the people how to treat one another. If he lies, they will lie. If he scorns, they will scorn. If he deceives, they will cease to care for truth itself. Another question, in light of all this. Are you proud to be an American?
Absolutely. My grandfather fought in the Second World War. People I love have died for this country. I'm proud of what they and you fought for. Is there a division? Yes. Is it contentious? Yes. Do I have significant disagreements? Who doesn't? But like you've been saying, the Republic is not about creating a government viewed as perfect for any one individual. That's a monarchy.
That's a monarchy.
Our democracy aims to give the people collectively, frankly, what they deserve, what they bargained for, good, bad, or indifferent. It goes back again to what you were saying earlier. Does the government represent the will of the people? And the answer to that, in my mind, is yes. And I'm proud to be a citizen of a nation that does that.
I thank you for that answer, and for the clarity of heart behind it. What you've just spoken is the very spirit I hoped would endure. Not blind pride, not despair, but earned belief. A pride forged in understanding, not illusion. Perfection is not the aim. Representation is. If more citizens like you feel this way, that to me is the clearest sign that the Republic still lives.
What was it like being on Truth Serum?
It was like standing before a mirror that will not blink. Just thought, memory, conscience laid bare. But peaceful.
What is something we haven't discussed that you would not have said out loud in life, but you'll say now?
I was afraid. Not just in battle, where fear is common and understood, but in governance, in judgment, in shaping a nation with no map to follow.
Wow.
I feared being seen as a fraud. I feared making the wrong decision and dooming the very thing we had fought to build.
You never spoke about these fears publicly?
A general cannot waver before his troops. A president cannot tremble before his people. To admit fear was to invite disorder, or worse, doubt. So I wore composure like a uniform. I spoke firmly, acted deliberately, and let others believe I was made of something steadier. That was necessary, perhaps even noble in its way, but it was also lonely. I never lied about my fear. I simply buried it beneath duty.
And how about now? Are you fearful for America? Are you hopeful?
You stand now, I believe, at a crossroads. You possess more power, more knowledge, more wealth than any generation before you. And yet you seem to struggle with truth, with unity, with trust in one another. If America continues down a path of division, where party outweighs principle, where outrage replaces discourse, where each side seeks victory rather than the common good, then yes, I fear for our future. Not from foreign enemies, but from the slow rot within. But if you can remember that liberty requires restraint, that citizenship is not a right alone, but a burden gladly borne. If you can rediscover a sense of shared purpose or mutual respect, then I believe the republic so many have fought for will endure.
Next on Truth Serum, Robert Johnson.